How do we hear the voice of the Spirit? Well, we're living in a generation, we're living in a time where people, they don't want to be mediocre anymore, but they want the genuine Spirit. They want to know, what is the Spirit telling them? How is the Spirit trying to get their attention? How does it speak, though? That's the question. How does the Spirit speak? How can we recognize it? Well, there are different methods that the Spirit uses to speak to us, and I have discovered a few of them, and I want to share them with you so that you could have an easier time, that you could have an understanding of how it works. So, the very first method that the Spirit uses to speak to man is the I call it the great impression. The impression of the Spirit is more than just a gut feeling, but this is something that's deep into our soul, something that you can't run away from. You can't run away from it because it's something spiritual. It's more than just a physical gut feeling. A gut feeling, usually you could escape it, but when it's a spiritual thing, it's a feeling that's embedded in your soul, and it's trying to speak to you. It's trying to tell you. It's trying to give you some direction. Now, an example that I use for this, or that you can discover, is in the book of Acts. When you see Paul, he's taking a voyage. He's taking a journey because he's already in prison, and he's taking a voyage with the Romans. And when they start their journey, Paul, he gets this feeling. He gets an impression in his soul, and he gives the pilots of the ship some direction and tells them, hey, I don't think we should go on this voyage, but we should wait because a storm's going to come in. He said, and we might lose our lives. But the pilots of the ship didn't take Paul's advice. And when he didn't take Paul's advice, the sailors went off to the voyage anyways with all the prisoners. And when he took them in and they went on their voyage, not heeding Paul's advice, when Paul had the impression of the Spirit not to do it, they took the voyage anyways, and the Bible says that they were so deep into a storm that they couldn't recognize the stars. And because they couldn't recognize the stars, they couldn't recognize the direction, because they had no guidance from the stars. All because they had to heed to the man of God. They had to heed to the one that had the impression, do not take the voyage yet, but we must wait. That's important. Not heeding the impression that the Spirit is giving you. If you can't heed to it, if you can't answer it, it's very possible that you can lose your guidance. And if you lose your guidance, you lose complete direction of your life. Now, there's consequences for that in the storm. So listen to the impression. When it comes on you, you feel it, and you're in prayer, and you feel like you have an impression that just won't leave, go with it. Do what it says. It's directing you. Now, there's a second method that the Spirit will use when it's trying to speak. It's a voice in you that's trying to speak. This second method is through others. The Spirit will use others to speak to you when you're going through hard times, when you're going through great trials, when you have a situation in your life and you're praying about it. Don't cut others off when you're trying to hear the voice of the Spirit, because the Spirit will use others to minister to you. Remember how it says, how can one be saved without a preacher? That is so true. When someone is speaking behind a pulpit, when someone's trying to give you direction, please don't neglect them. Please don't look at them like they don't know what they're talking about. Listen to them. Listen to what they have to say. How do I know this is true? Well, remember Job when he was going through his great trial. He lost his kids. He lost his family. He lost his living, his business. He lost a lot of things, and he was the wealthiest man in the East. But he lost so much, and he almost lost his wife. But his wife actually her advice to him was to curse God and die. You never want to curse God and die. But he had 3 friends that came his way to try to encourage him. But his 3 friends, instead of encouraging him, they were actually discouraging him, because they were telling him, they were acting like they were the voice of God. And they were telling him, hey, Job, you did something wrong in your life. You're full of sin. That's why you're going through the trial. But Job defended himself and said, no, I'm not. He said, I've been righteous. He was defending himself. Until when you get towards the end of the book, you remember Elihu, if I'm saying his name right, Elihu stood up. He was the youngest of them all. Now, don't ever judge somebody because they're young. Don't ever judge anybody by their appearance. When God wants to use somebody to speak to you, because he will, the Spirit will use somebody to speak to you, that time will come. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what color they are. It doesn't matter where they're from. It doesn't matter their culture. It doesn't matter what age they are. Elihu was the youngest of all 4 or 5 of them that were there in that group setting. Elihu was never asked to speak. He got up and said, I was listening to you all the whole time. He said, but now I'm going to give you my opinion. I'm going to give you what the Spirit has given him. Elihu became the mediator between God and Job. He became that mediator for Job at the time, because Job was crying inside. Job was dying, that he'd have somebody to speak to him the words of God, that he will encourage him. He was looking for a mediator, somebody to be between him and God, to bring a message. And Elihu became that voice for him. Elihu spoke to him the things that were right. He rebuked the 3 friends that Job had because they were accusing him. He spoke to them and told them, he corrected them and said, you guys are wrong. You 3 are wrong because you don't know the thing that is right. And he looked at Job and he said, Job, you need to give God more glory than what you're giving him. You're complaining too much. So he corrected him, but he gave him the words from God. It was a correction from God. So God does speak through people when we are going through things. We're going through difficult times. So please don't neglect them. Don't shut them out. You shut them off, and it's like you're shutting the Spirit off. God speaks through people today. Those are the vessels that he uses, people. It doesn't matter what age they are. Now, the third method that the Spirit will use to speak to you so that you could hear the voice of the Spirit, believe it or not, but it is the audible voice. He will come to us when you least expect it. When you least expect it, he will speak to you. It is like he is speaking right in your ear. You could hear an audible voice. This happens, or this did happen for an example. It happened during Samuel's life. If you remember Samuel, he was a young man, and he was going to bed at night. When everyone was sleeping, God spoke to him. The Spirit spoke to him. It was at night. Now, sometimes you say, does God speak to us audibly today? Does he? He does. But this takes much focus. In order for there to be so much focus, you have to go through some kind of darkness. Why? Why do you got to go through? Because when you go through darkness, you begin to focus on the Spirit. Because when you get a voice from God, an audible voice, this happens when you're in the Spirit. In order to get in the Spirit, you get into prayer. Whether you're in hard times or good times, you get into prayer. Most people get this because they go through some kind of darkness and they're encouraged. They're lured into the prayer room. And when they're lured into the prayer room, that's when they shut everything else off. They shut off all entertainment, all pleasures, and they get into focusing on the Spirit. So much focus that when they go to bed at night, you can be going to bed at night, and the Spirit will speak a word to you of encouragement right in the ear. Now, these methods are the ways that the Spirit uses today. But so many of us are so curious about how he speaks, and he's revealing it to you. He might be speaking to you right now, telling you how it's done. But I think one more curiosity is more important, and that is, can you become that voice? That's the greater question. We want to hear something from the Spirit. We want to get some information because we want greatness. Because we don't want something that's going to be temporal, but we want something that is eternal. We want eternal words to come our way so that we can prosper. And those are good things. Those are good desires. But I think the real question that the Spirit has for us is, can we make ourselves available so that we can become that voice for somebody that is hurting? To me, that is greater than anything else. When you can become a voice, when you can become a minister for somebody that's going through pain, for somebody that's going through loss. Maybe they lost their child. Maybe they lost their mother. Maybe they lost their job. I don't know. Maybe they're going through a hard time. Maybe they're going through a repossession of their vehicle. Something that they're losing that's of value to them. It's so much value, but they need somebody. They need some encouragement. That's when the Spirit would rather speak through a person like you and I. But we got to make ourselves available. We got to pray, God, speak through us, help us, send us, help us be that person, help us be that prophet that you want us to be, so that we can encourage our brothers, that we can encourage and help them become their greatest version. Help them become their greatest version. Help them fulfill their purpose in life. That's the real question the Spirit has. Can we be available for that? Can we do that? The only thing that's stopping us to do something like that is ourselves.